everybody, it's Chrissy Myers with My Home Team. Welcome back. Today we are making cinnamon rolls and you do not want to miss it. Stay tuned. Happy holidays, everybody. As you might have guessed, in our house we celebrate Christmas from the decorations. So I hope they're not distracting to you. If they are, I apologize, but I didn't want to take the decorations down just to put them right back up again. So please forgive my laziness. I hope it's okay. All right. So today we are making cinnamon rolls, as I said earlier. And cinnamon rolls are a big tradition in our house at this time of year. Every Christmas before we open our presents, we have cinnamon rolls. Actually, we have these homemade cinnamon rolls. And we have them a couple other times throughout the year, but not very often because quite literally, I can eat a dozen of them in a day and a half because I love them so much. And that's not very good for me, so I try not to make them very often. But we're making them today, and my kids are going to be so excited when they come home to see them. All right, let's get started. So I've included the recipe down below in the comments section, or if you're watching this from our newsletter, I've attached a link with the newsletter as well. But to get you started, we're going to need 1/3 cup of butter, 1 cup of warm milk heated not to go over 115 degrees because anything over 115 degrees will kill the yeast, 1 package or 1/4 ounce of yeast, depending on if you buy it in the bottle or if you buy it in the package, 2 eggs, thanks to our chickens out back, and 1 teaspoon of salt and a 1/2 cup of sugar. So the first thing you need to do is take your yeast and put it in your warm milk, and then just take a whisk or a spoon, give it a quick stir, get it all incorporated, and then let it sit. You don't want to mess with it too much. So I'll just set that aside for now. Then you're going to take your butter and scrape the edges. That way you get all the goodness. You don't want to leave any of it in there. So our dog loves him some butter. Holy moly, when I was chopping it up to melt it, he was just standing at the counter and just licking his chops and salivating. He was so excited. I'm like, this is not for you, buddy. We actually have to make sure that we keep it back because if it's on the edge of the counter, he will get it every time because he loves butter. All right, your sugar, 1 teaspoon of salt. Now you want to make sure you don't do the salt directly in with the yeast at any point whenever you're doing a recipe involving yeast because the salt will kill the yeast. So the sugar feeds it so that it makes those bubbles, and then the salt keeps it from making too much. So it kind of keeps it in line. Plus salt adds flavor. And then we need our 2 eggs. Thought I got a sugar, but I didn't. And I like to take my whisk and just kind of beat the yolks and crack them a little bit because the dough hook does not do a very good job of beating the eggs. So these all right. Give it a quick mix. And scrape. Scraping is very important whenever you're baking because you want to make sure that you don't get like a soggy bottom and a dry top. You want everything to be well incorporated. Alright, I think that'll do it. And then typically they say to wait about 5 minutes. I know my yeast is alive, which is the only reason why you let it sit to froth. So since I know it's alive, I'm not really concerned about it. I'm just going to dump it in early, but if you have any doubts, definitely let it sit the full amount of time. Plus it just helps wake them up and get them ready for the party. Alright, so get that well mixed. Don't go too high, because if you go too high, then what you're gonna do is you're just gonna slosh it all over your face. Nobody wants that. Alright. Now I'm gonna start with the 3½ cups of flour. And then depending on the weather will depend on whether that's a good amount or if you need to add more. If there's a lot of moisture in the air, then you'll most likely need to add some more. So if it's rainy or kind of snowy outside, although sometimes in the winter, if your house is really dry, then you don't need quite as much. So it's just kind of a wait and see. Again, not too high. You don't want flour all over your face in the kitchen. It's not fun to clean. Okay, so our dough is really sticky, which is what I expected, but it's always better to play it safe because you don't want to add too much right away and then it'd be dry because you can't take it out. So I'm going to add some more flour. This is a ½ cup measure, but I'm only going to put half of it in, and we're going to start at about 1/4 cup. Just spilled flour everywhere. At a time. There's a hole in my flour bag. Alright. So I think another 1/4 cup will do it. We're pretty close. I don't really measure, I just kind of eyeball it because it's all pretty subjective. So just because I use 1/4 cup this time doesn't mean it's going to take that extra 1/4 cup next time. So I don't worry about it too much. Okay, it feels pretty good. So I feel it, and it's sticking. See, maybe it's just a tad more, but it's really close. You want to be able to touch it, and it sticks, but doesn't leave a bunch of gunk on your fingers. All right, since it's where I want it to be, I am going to just let it go in the mixer for a while. So sticky, not too sticky, perfect. So to test it, what you do is you take a little chunk and you gently use your, let me see if I can get closer where you can see, and you use your fingers, and it's called the window pane method, where you stretch it out so that it's nice and thin and translucent. I'm not sure if you guys can see it. Oh, stretched it a bit too far. But it's not ripping in the middle, it's just ripping where my fingers were, which is what you want. It's getting nice and stretched. I don't know if you can see the translucent aspect of it, but that is what you want. Let me try another piece, see if I can show you. You don't want anything too big because the whole point is just to use your fingers to make a window pane where the light gets through. And if you hold it up to the light, you can see these little strands throughout, and that's the gluten development. And gluten development is really important because that's what traps all the air bubbles from the yeast to get that rise for your bread. All right, so that looks really awesome. It's exactly what we want it to be. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna take it out and you're going to kind of smooth it over to make a ball shape. And if it's got the gluten developed the way it should and you've got it kneaded long enough, it shouldn't be tearing right here when you're doing this. It should just be stretching just like it is, which is perfect. Then I'm gonna take some oil. Now you want to use canola or vegetable oil, nothing really overpowering like olive oil, because then you're gonna taste that in it. You don't want that. All right, so holding over the bowl, you pour a little bit on the top and you cover it with just a thin coat. You want a little bit heavy. And then you kind of use what dripped into your bowl and spread that around the bottom so it doesn't stick. Now the whole purpose of putting this oil on is so that your dough doesn't develop a skin. If it develops a skin, then it's going to get really tight and it's not going to expand and stretch when the yeast puts the air bubbles in, and it's going to make a really poor quality product. All right, so we put it back in the bowl and then we're going to cover it with plastic wrap. Again, it's to help prevent a skin from forming because that's really a killer to breads. And then you cover it up and you let it sit in a warm place for about an hour until it's doubled in size. All right, I'll see you back in an hour. All right, guys, so it's been about an hour. Our dough has doubled in size. And now I'm going to start working on our filling. So what you need is 1 cup of brown sugar. I like the dark brown sugar better, but that's just my personal preference. If you would rather do light brown sugar or all you have is light brown sugar, then use that. Let's be honest. I only had about 3/4 of a cup of dark brown sugar, so there's some light brown sugar mixed in there too. It's fine. And then you need 2.5-ish tablespoons of cinnamon. I'm gonna be honest with you on this one too. I put a smidge more in, but whatever you want. I didn't go crazy with it, just a smidge. And then this is the cinnamon that I like to use. I don't know how you say it, honestly. It's currente, is my guess, currente. But you can get it on Amazon, or I think they sell it at Whole Foods as well. But it has a richer, bolder cinnamon flavor, so that's why I like to use it. So we also need some margarine. Now you can use butter if you would prefer to use butter because it tastes better. But the margarine is nice because it doesn't leak out the bottom so much when you're baking it, so you don't get as big of a puddle at the bottom of the cinnamon sugar stuff that gets burnt if it cooks too long. So that's why I like to use margarine for this part of the aspect. I did use butter in the dough itself, but I use margarine for the spread and filling. So we need 1/4 cup. So I cut it in half. But we're going to use the other half to spread it on, so don't put it away. And we want it to be nice and soft. And again, the recipe is on the link below, so don't worry about writing it all down. We've got you. So then I just take a fork and I mix them all together until it's nice and homogeneous. And it takes a little bit, but it's not too bad. I don't want to see chunks of butter and chunks of cinnamon. I want it all mixed up together. Here's what it should look like. Boy, the sun is really shining bright over here. Sorry. And then here is what our dough looks like. Isn't it beautiful? So we're gonna just punch the air out of the dough. All that time and effort waiting for it to rise, and then we just punch it right out. But that's how it goes with bread. And then I'm gonna put that over here. And I'm going to take my dough, and just by hand, I'm going to form a rough triangle or rectangle shape. Hello. All right, so it's not perfect, but it is rectangular shaped and it's fairly even. So I don't have like a high section here and a low section. Well, actually I do have a little bit of a high section right there. But just doing this will make it easier for you with the rolling out process. So here we go, rough rectangle shape. And now we spread it out. Let me get this out of the way. Get the plant out of the way too. Alright, so see how I'm rolling it to try to help it keep its shape on its own. No sense in fighting with it. If you can make it work for you, make it work for you. And then a lot of times I'll even come in afterwards and I'll kind of lift it up and stretch it and get it the shape that I want to, just to help it along a little bit. Oh, a little extra cinnamon sugar. That's all right. It's just extra goodness. And what you're wanting is a shape that is about between 16 and 18 inches wide and 21 to 24 inches long. I like to make it a little bit bigger and thinner because then I have a more even distribution of dough to filling, which I like because I don't really care for when you have cinnamon rolls and you get a big chunk of the dough but not that much of the cinnamon. So that's just my personal preference. These are your cinnamon rolls. Do what you want. All right, so remember how we set aside this other dough, wow, it's not dough. This other margarine, wow. You remember how we set aside this other margarine? Now we're gonna use it. Okay, so I dump it on, and I use an offset spatula, but if you do not have one, then just a knife is perfectly fine. And you want to spread it across the whole dough. So you want to make sure you get all the sides and everything. And it's going to be thin, so it might take you a little bit. But you can do it. I've got every confidence in you. Okay. Getting some air bubbles in here. And then I don't know if you noticed, but I did not flour my surface. To get you in the shot, I gotta talk down here. So I did not flour the surface when I was rolling out the dough because that actually makes it harder because then it just slides everywhere. So I just roll it straight on the clean surface. I do not worry about flouring it or anything like that. Make it easy on yourself. You've got enough stuff going on. See how I'm going right to the edge. Make sure we get all the goodness all the way around. Okay. So that looks pretty good. That looks even better. Now I'm going to dump my cinnamon sugar mixture, and we're going to do the exact same thing. All right, so we're just gonna spread it out just like the butter or margarine, whichever you used. And again, you want to get it all the way out to the edges, mainly on the long sides here, because these are going to get cut off. So if it doesn't go quite to the edge over here, it's not such a big deal, but these are going, because we're rolling it this way. So we want to make sure we get everything we can. Now you can definitely cook those scraps too, I usually do. What I actually do is I combine the two scraps together to make one really funky looking cinnamon roll. But you know what? Kids still eat it. So if you go a little faster, then it'll kind of clump up. I don't know if you can see it on the video, but it'll kind of clump up here and help you move it along if you need it to go to a different area. But if you go slow, then it smooths it out and makes it nice and even. So depending on what you're trying to make it do, depends on the speed that you want to be spreading. So if you're moving it, go fast. If you're just smoothing it, go slow. So So now we're gonna start at the end closest to you, okay? And we're gonna just use our fingers to gently coax it off the countertop. And we're rolling it, make sure you roll it tight. You don't want any big loose cinnamon rolls. Okay, so once you got it started off, then it's really easy and you can just roll it up. Now that we've got it rolled, what we need to do, get out of the way a little bit, is take our cinnamon rolls, put them on a cutting board. Okay, we're gonna trim off the ends. I had some crazy ends. I didn't do a very good job rolling, but it'll be okay. And you can either use a chef knife, like I am, and you're gonna wanna cut them about inch and a half wide. Okay, aren't they pretty? And you stick it on a sheet tray or a 9x13, whatever you wanna use to cook them on. Or, if you would rather, you can thank your dentist for giving you the floss, unless you guys actually use it. I don't usually use it. And you can put it underneath, about a ½ inch, and you wrap it, and then you pull it like that, and it also cuts it, but it keeps the shape nice and round. If you use a knife, it'll squish it, like this, but then you just can round it out with your fingers. It's not a big deal. You just stick them right there, make it easier. And you can make them thinner if you want to make them thinner. I wouldn't advise going much thicker than an inch and a half, because then you're going to have a hard time getting them to cook. But if you like a nice thick cinnamon roll, inch and a half should be good. And then I like to set mine on a tray, 12 to 20 per tray, depends on how big your sheet tray is. You want them to have enough room so that they can expand when they're cooking, but not so far that they get dry. It's kind of a happy medium is what we're looking for. My cinnamon rolled really big today compared to what I normally do. It's okay. So if you make them thinner, you're going to want to cook them less time, so maybe 10 to 12 minutes. If you make them thicker, like what I'm doing, then you might want to go more like 15 minutes. And then I personally like them, would rather be a little underdone than a little overdone. But, you know, adjust it however you like. It's your cinnamon rolls. And then we have a couple of extras that won't fit. And then see these scraps? Okay, a couple of things. First, you might be tempted to pop it in your mouth and eat it. I would not advise it because the yeast in it is still alive. So when it gets in your stomach is nice and warm. And those yeast just go to town and they start making all these air bubbles. And then your tummy hurts a lot because you got all this gas filled up. Now, if you have a burping competition you have to go to afterwards, then maybe give it a try. But your tummy's gonna hurt. So don't eat it, cook it. But see how I've got these weird scraps? What I like to do, because I don't want to waste them, because although it's not hard, it does take a lot of work and time. I'll just combine them together to make one crazy wonky one. And there you go, crazy wonky one. Eats just as well as the regular ones. So once you get them cut in on your sheet tray, what you need to do is take your plastic wrap and cover them up again and let them sit again for another 20 to 30 minutes. And we do this for the same reason that we covered up the bowl, because we don't want it to get a skin, because they still have to do some more proofing. So we gotta let them sit They'll puff up a little bit more again once they're in their final shape. That's what proofing is. And then we can bake them in an oven at 350 degrees for as long as they need to be, depending on your size. But use the time frames that I gave you earlier as your guideline. Alright, so now we sit and wait again. But it gives us a great opportunity to clean up our messes. Alright guys, almost done, I promise. So now that we have our cinnamon rolls all baked, we need a 1/4 cup of butter. For this I use actual butter, not margarine. 3 ounces of cream cheese. Both of these things need to be softened so that it's not hard and you get all these lumps. Oh, I want lumpy cream cheese frosting. Okay. Vanilla. I usually use vanilla bean paste, but I'm out of vanilla bean paste right now. So I gotta wait for Christmas to get another batch. And then 1½ cups of powdered sugar. So I use a hand mixer because it's just easier sometimes to use a hand mixer than it is to deal with the big mixer. Maybe a little. This thing's old. Got it as a wedding gift, so it's 15 years old. So, you know, it's not doing too bad. Alright, so you want to take your cinnamon roll and just use the offset spatula to spin it around. Nothing fancy. They look really good and they smell really good. You guys are going to be so excited. If you bring these to breakfast, or, well, since they take so long, we rarely eat them for breakfast. They're usually an afternoon, evening treat. And then if I do have them for breakfast, like Christmas morning, what I usually do is I'll bake them the day before and then just reheat them. And they're just as good reheated, so keep that in mind. But whoever you make these for, they're going to be very excited and they're going to love you. So depending on how big you cut them, this recipe makes between 15 and 24. So you can always freeze them. They're really good frozen too, but I freeze them after I bake them, not before, because I tend to have a hard time getting them to turn out the way I want if I do it beforehand. So bake them, freeze them, then you just have to heat them up and ice them. Alright guys, you make these for somebody and they are going to love you. Alright, thanks for joining me. Next week I think we're gonna go ahead and make a special chocolate cake that has a really fun surprise ingredient in it that you are not going to expect. But trust me on this, it's gonna be good. Alright guys, have a great week and I will talk to you later. Bye.